And so the traditional greeting for during Passover is Moadim L'Simcha. May the holiday be for joy. And the blessing for Torah study, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So this coming Shabbat is the seventh day of Passover. So we detour from the weekly cycle of Torah readings for a special Torah reading for the seventh day of the holiday. And because of that, I thought we would look at the Haftorah, not just for the seventh day, but also for the eighth day. So we'll look at the Haftorahs instead of the Torah readings. While I'm talking, before we get started, the Haftorah for the seventh day of Passover in the Eitz Chaim Chumash is on page 1311. So in Eitz Chaim, turn to 1311. If you're in the Hertz or anything else, just look in the table of contents for the holiday Haftorahs for the one for seventh day of Passover. So the Torah reading for the seventh day of Passover is a continuation of what we read last week and also during the holiday. It starts from chapter 12 of Exodus, the preparation for the Exodus itself. We read on the first day of Passover how the Israelites followed through on that command and what would happen that night as the plague of the death of the firstborn happened around the Israelites, and they were leaving Egypt. During chapter 13, we continue during the holiday is part of the reading, and for Shabbat we read as they are leaving Egypt and the crossing the sea. So the tradition is that it took that 5 or 6 days from the first night of Passover until the seventh day when the Israelites actually crossed the sea. That's the tradition. That from reading the Torah itself, it looks like it all happens in a day, but the tradition is that it took a little while to leave Goshen, that area of Egypt that the Israelites were living in, to get to the shores of Yam Suf, the Reed Sea, and then to be aware that the Egyptians are chasing after them, and the miracle of the sea splitting. So that's the reading for the seventh day. The reading for the eighth day, which is not a holiday in Israel, it's already post-holiday on Sunday. The reading for the eighth day is the reading from a selection from the book of Deuteronomy, which recaps the section in Leviticus, which describes the various sacred occasions that are celebrated throughout the year. So since we've done Bishalach already, and that's where the seventh day Torah reading comes from, the portion Bishalach, and we've done the portion Re'eh already, where the portion for the eighth day comes from, I thought we would look at the Haftorah selections and just learn a little bit about some of how God is depicted in the Haftorah for the seventh day and the vision of the Messianic era that Isaiah depicts for the Haftorah for the eighth day of Passover. So the Haftarah for the seventh day is long. It's 51 sentences, but it's written in poetic style. And I just will look at a couple of themes that are displayed here. It's taken from the 22nd chapter of the second book of Samuel. In the Bible, the order of the books of the Jewish Bible are Torah is first, then the book of Joshua, then the book of Judges, and then the two books of Samuel. So the two books of Samuel provide a transition from the end of the Judges period, when there were these individual judges in different parts of Israel that served as leaders of the people, till Samuel, as a prophet and judge, kind of is tasked by God to appoint Saul to be the first king. And then David, who kills Goliath, and then also manages to, in another battle, to recapture the Ark of the Covenant that the Philistines had captured and bring it back to Jerusalem. David becomes a popular figure for the people of Israel, and the kingship shifts from Saul to David. So that's, and Saul, also in the book of Samuel, chases after David and tries to kill him. So chapter 22 here of 2 Samuel is a psalm. It happens to be very similar to almost the exact repetition of Psalm 18 that David recited on one of these times that he was saved from King Saul's hands. So David is traditionally the author of all 150 Psalms. The placement of this here in the book of Samuel makes it as if David himself did write this himself, but we don't know for sure. But it doesn't have to be read as the book of Psalms serve as spiritual texts. We don't have to just understand them as David's words. They are words that respond to a variety of emotions that we feel. So let's take a look at this. Again, we're on page 1311 in the Eitz Chaim. David addressed the words of this song to the Lord after the Lord had saved him from the hands of all his enemies and from the hands of Saul. I just want to point something out in the English translation. The Hebrew says, Vayidaber David la'Adonai, David spoke to God, et divrei hashira hazot, the words of this song or poem. Shira, it's one of these words. It's unusual. You have the word shir or shira, masculine and feminine, both masculine and feminine forms of the word mean the exact same thing. So I'm not sure why that is, why you have the word shir, but you also have the word shira. And both of them is song and poem. It's just one of these unusual things. And in the songs that we sing Friday night in Kabbalat Shabbat, there's Shir Chadash and there's also Shira Chadasha. So both mean new song, both in the feminine and in the masculine. So David spoke to God the words of this song, B'yom hitzil Adonai oto. You would translate that on the day that God saved him from the hand, mikaf. Kaf is the palm of the hand, but it also could be the heel of the foot, the bottom of the foot. So kaf regel or kaf yad. Kaf yad would be the palm. The kaf regel would be the bottom of the foot. So mikaf kol oivav, from the hand of all his enemies, umikaf Shaul, on the hand of Saul. So the only question about the Hebrew is translating the word biyom. So it seems from the Hebrew that David wrote this on the day that he was saved from the hand of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. The English translation has it as after. I'm not sure, and there's no comment about it. I'm not sure why the English translators thought to do it as after as opposed to on the day. So it's possible that in biblical Hebrew that biyom could mean after, but it just doesn't seem that way to me. It's just something to think about. It's not really important for the theme of the entire Haftorah. It's just another, I've pointed out in this past year as we've gone through Torah study, that the English translation isn't a literal translation, and we have to be kind of careful when we read it. So he said, verse 2, O Lord, my crag, my fastness, my deliverer. Again, crag. So, crag is part of a cliff, rock face. In Hebrew, sal'i, my rock and my fastness could be my fortress, my deliverer. O God, the rock wherein I take shelter, my shield, my mighty champion, my fortress and refuge, my savior, you who rescue me from violence. Okay, so David is picturing God as something solid and impenetrable, something that is stable, something that is unmoving, a rock, a fortress, Suri, my rock, and my shield, right? All of these hard, fast, solid images that you kind of look for if you're running away from somebody. If you're seeking sanctuary, you seek sanctuary in a place where you're going to be safe, whether that's in a church or whether it's in a fortress or whether it's in your home and the doors are securely locked and the alarm system is turned on, something like that. This gets the image. David projects this image here of what God, of God that provides this sanctuary for him. Verse 4, all praise, I called on the Lord and I was delivered from my enemies. For the breakers of death encompassed me, the torrents of Belial terrified me, the snares of Sheol encircled me, the coils of death engulfed me. It's just interesting that sometimes in the English translation, not even making it italics, they just don't bother translating directly the Hebrew word, just leaving it as is in the English. And all the commentary says to us below, death, right? So it's the word mavet is the word for death, and then Belial and Sheol, three names for the netherworld. So mavet with a capital D is meant here in this poetic verse to be a reference to the netherworld. I should point out, just let me take a moment here, the idea of what happens after we die is limited in the Bible. In the Bible, there are depictions of Sheol somewhere underground. Like elsewhere in the book of Samuel, King Saul goes to the witch of Endor to call up Samuel's ghost, and he's called up from the netherworld for Saul to have an interaction with. And so Sheol is usually the word to refer to underground where our bodies go. But the whole idea of a soul living on after we die, that there is this next world up in God's heavenly realm, that is all created by the rabbis. All the Bible has, when we die, our bodies go down to the netherworld, but the Bible does not describe anywhere what happens to our bodies after we die, and has no concept of a soul. And so the word nephesh, which is used in rabbinic and especially in modern Hebrew to mean soul, in the Bible just means body. So it's the rabbis who transformed the Hebrew language and that particular word to mean what it means for us today. So that when we understand the word nephesh today to mean soul, we are tempted every time we see the word nefesh in the Bible to translate it as soul. But that would be an inaccurate translation. It means body. So we just have to be aware that what's depicted here is only serves the purpose of providing a jumping off point for the rabbis to create this whole idea of what happens to us after we die, that the soul lives on, and that there's a world to come. So death,
Rabbi,
yes, yes,
is
so.
there any commentary that Sheol has the same letters as Shaol?
As Shaul, right?
Wow.
So that's a good point, Saul. Yes. So I'm not aware of commentary that would say that, but it would be it wouldn't. It's a good idea because the vowels that are put in the words are later than the Bible was written itself, and it could be that. Now it makes sense from context that it would be the word Sheol as a synonym for Belial and as a synonym for Mavet. So it makes sense that it would be Sheol. And then, so there's Mavet, Belial, Sheol, and Mavet. So if you just look at the Hebrew of verses 5 and 6, Mavet is the last word of the first line. Belial is the middle word of the second line. Sheol is the middle word of the third line. Mavet is the last word of the fourth line. So it serves as a poetic piece there. Mavet, Belial, Sheol, Mavet. So that makes sense that it would be Sheol. But to read it as Shaul, the snares of Saul encircled me, well, yeah, he could mean that too. And you could read it that way if you wanted to, because he was saved. He ran away from Saul and found sanctuary. You could read that. So I would say it would be as if you wanted to make a comment about it, you could read it that way if you wanted to. But it clearly, from a literary perspective, it makes more sense to read it as Sheol instead of Shaul. Okay, verse 7. In my anguish I called to the Lord, cried out to my God. In his abode he heard my voice. So his abode there is a capital A. The word in Hebrew is Heichal, and that's usually another word for the temple in Jerusalem. But the temple in Jerusalem doesn't exist yet because it hasn't been built yet. It doesn't get built until David's son Solomon builds it. So this Heichal, it's the heavenly abode then. And there's in later rabbinic understanding, just as there's a temple in Jerusalem, there's the earthly temple, there's also the heavenly temple. So the temple in Jerusalem is a mirror image of the temple that's in heaven. So this could raise the question as to when this was written. Was this written by David himself? Was it written by an author who was later when the temple was already standing because of the use of the word Heichal? It just leaving it out there. In his abode, he heard my voice. My cry entered his ears. Then the earth rocked and quaked. The foundations of heaven shook, rocked by his indignation. Smoke went up from his nostrils. From his mouth came devouring fire. Live coals blazed forth from him. He bent the sky and came down, thick cloud beneath his feet. He mounted a cherub and flew. He was seen on the wings of the wind. Now, this image, verse 11 here, he mounted a cherub and flew. I remember this from one of my Bible classes in rabbinical school, that there are images from the same time as the Israelites here in the Bible, Canaanite images and other societies have images of a god flying on a winged bull or cow. And so here then it's not unusual for Israelite authors to use those images and make them Jewish or make them Israelite. So if you have a pagan god flying on the back of a cow or a bull, well, then we can have God flying on the back of a bull. And the cherub, we actually don't know what a cherub looks like. We picture like a baby with wings, but that's Christian depictions of what a cherub is. We're not exactly sure from the Jewish Bible itself what a cherub looks like. So is it a being with human form with wings? It's certainly something with wings, because the cherubim, plural of cherub, are on top of the ark in the Mishkan, in the portable sanctuary, and later in the temple in Jerusalem. So the ark here, let me switch my background and you'll see. The ark that we have in the chapel, right, let me move out of the way, has these wings on top of it. That's because Lisa Arbor's family, who built this ark for Lisa's daughter Yardane's bat mitzvah, depicted it based on what the book of Exodus said, with these wings on top. So that's where that came from. So these two cherubim were facing each other on top of the ark, but what these cherubim looked like, we don't know. Scholars still debate what exactly the cherub looked like. He mounted a cherub and flew. He was seen on the wings of the wind. He made pavilions of darkness about him, dripping clouds, huge thunderheads. In the brilliance before him blazed fiery coals. The Lord thundered forth from heaven. The Most High sent forth his voice. He let loose bolts and scattered them, lightning, and put them to rout. The bed of the sea was exposed. The foundations of the world were laid bare by the mighty roaring of the Lord and the blast of the breath of his nostrils. He reached down from on high. He took me, drew me out of the mighty waters. He rescued me from my enemies so strong, from foes too mighty for me. Now, here is one connection to Passover, why this is chosen as a haftarah for the seventh day of Passover, right? Because the bulk of the reading, the highlight of the reading from the Torah is the song at the sea, when the Israelites crossed through and sang the song that God drowned the Egyptians in the sea and saved us from the sea. And here he drew me out of the mighty waters, right? So this particular reference adds to why this is chosen. So the Song of the Sea in chapter 15 of Exodus is the salvation of the Israelite people at that time, which serves as a basis for lots of the prayers, like every morning and evening in the morning and evening services, the prayer after the Shema before the Amidah focuses on the redemption of our Israelite ancestors from Egypt, and how it serves as a model and a hope for future redemption. So the Torah reading is not just about reading a historical event, but it's a hope for a future event as well. The Haftarah then, not just about David being saved from the hand of his enemies, but also for us to see that we can be saved by God, feel that we can be saved by God as well. Verse 19, they attacked me on my day of calamity, but the Lord was my stay. He brought me out to freedom. He rescued me because he was pleased with me. The Lord rewarded me according to my merit. He requited the cleanness of my hands. For I have kept the ways of the Lord, and I have not been guilty before my God. I am mindful of all his rules. and have not departed from his laws. I have been blameless before him and have guarded myself against sinning, and the Lord has requited my merit according to my purity in his sight. Right, so here's another idea too that the rabbis expand upon. We're worthy of being saved only if we follow in God's ways. So if we follow in God's ways, we follow the covenant, then we should feel worthy of being saved by God. If we neglect God's ways, then not only won't we be saved, we might be punished. So here is uh, a theme that has been in the Torah, is repeated here and elsewhere in the Bible too. With 13:13, verse 26, with the loyal you deal loyally, with the blameless hero blamelessly, with the pure you act in purity, and with the perverse you are wily. To humble folk you give victory, and you look with scorn on the haughty. You, O Lord, are my lamp. The Lord lights up my darkness. So here we have several images of God here. David starts by referring to God as a fortress, a rock, something impenetrable and solid. And then God is thunderous, bringing the powers of the heavens down on earth to wreak whatever work God wants to do. And now God is a lamp. The Lord lights up my darkness. So this is like the third kind of image that we have of God. Very different images. Either what is God? Is God a rock? Is God this thunderous power? Or is God a light? Of course, the answer is God is everything and all things. With you, verse 30, I can rush a barrier with my God. I can scale a wall. The way of God is perfect. The way of the Lord is pure. He is a shield to all who take refuge in him. Yea, who is a God except the Lord? Who is a rock except God? Now he's back to the theme of God, of God being a rock. The God, my mighty stronghold, who kept my path secure, who made my legs like a deer's and set me firm on the heights, who trained my hands for battle so that the arms can bend a bow of bronze. You have granted me the shield of your protection, and your providence has made me great. You have let me stride on freely, and my feet have not slipped. I pursued my enemies and wiped them out. I did not turn back till I destroyed them. I destroyed them. I struck them down. They rose no more. They lay at my feet. You have girt me with strength for battle, brought low my foes within me. So God now is this internal strength that enabled David to have this power to defeat his enemies. Made my enemies turn tail before me, my foes, and I wiped them out. They looked, but there was none to deliver to the Lord, but he answered them not. I pounded them like dust of the earth, stamped, crushed them like dirt of the streets. You have rescued me from the strife of peoples, kept me to be a ruler of nations. Peoples I knew not must serve me. Aliens have cringed before me, paid me homage at the mere report of me. Aliens have lost courage and come trembling out of their fastness. The Lord lives. Blessed is my rock. Exalted be God, the rock who gives me victory. The God who has vindicated me and made peoples subject to me, rescued me from my enemies, raised me clear of my foes, saved me from lawless men. For this I sing your praise among the nations and hymn your name. Tower of victory to his king who deals graciously with his anointed, with David and his offspring evermore. Right? So this is a personal song of salvation and praise to God, and picturing God in these variety of images, and may God be deal graciously with him, with David, and with his offspring forever. This phrase, verse 51, is in Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals. And you notice that there's a word right after the number 51 here on page 1314. Just the way out this edition, the Eitz Chaim depicts. I'm not sure how the Hertz or the other Chumashim do it, but you have the word as it appears in the text without vowels. So it looks like it's the word magdil, but it's supposed to be read, the very next word in larger font, the regular font with vowels, as migdol. So when we say Birkat Hamazon, we maintain the different pronunciations depending on whether we say Birkat Hamazon on a weekday or we say it on a Shabbat or a holiday. On a Shabbat or a holiday, we do it as migdol. On a weekday, we say magdil. So the difference is we're translated, the English translation is based on the word with the vowels. Migdol is a tower, okay? But magdil would mean we exalt. We would say exalt victory to his king. So either God is a tower of victory, or we give praise or raise up the victory to God. Okay, so there's often a yud and a vav become scribal errors, and so it's unclear whether it's supposed to be a yud or a vav, and the rabbis weren't sure whether it's supposed to be a yud or a vav, and they maintained both in the Birkat Hamazon, depending, like I said, depending on whether we say it on a weekday or Shabbat or a holiday. Right, you know this Magdil Yeshua Ma'akav Yosef Chesed Limshicho LeDavido LeZaro Ad Olam Oseh Shalom Bimroma. Right, okay, so that's where that's from. So this also raises a question as to when this chapter was written. Why would David put himself in the third person and refer to himself and his descendants forever in the third person? So it just raises a question about the authorship or the time and place when this chapter was written. Okay, so we have God depicted in the, so when the theme of the seventh day of Passover is about the actual redemption from slavery and redemption from the Egyptian army and redemption from the power of the water to drown the people, right? So three times redemption from the 200 years or more of slavery in Egypt, from the attacking Egyptian army, and from the water that threatens to drown the people. This threefold redemption is what we remember on the seventh day of Passover. We have this Haftarah that also depicts God as this redeeming force in a variety of ways. How is God a salvation? As a solid rock, as an active thunderous force, or as the light that leads us into salvation? It's all of them, and we can imagine salvation being expressed in those variety of ways as well. So seventh day of Passover is all about that victory and salvation. Eighth day of Passover takes on a different theme. So we read, just like I said, from the book of Deuteronomy about the holidays and as they are to be celebrated throughout the year. The Haftarah is this famous image from Isaiah in which he is imagining what the future is going to look like. So we focus on the eighth day on the Messianic era, on this time in the future when we'll be brought back to Israel, and the Messiah, the anointed one, descended from King David, will be the new king over the ingathering the Israelite Jewish community again. So the 8th-day Passover Haftarah begins on 13:16, and this is a little bit of a shorter Haftarah than the one we just read. This same day at Nov, he shall stand and wave his hand. O mount of fair Zion, O hill of Jerusalem, lo, the sovereign Lord of hosts will hew off the tree crowns with an axe. The tall ones shall be felled, the lofty ones cut down. The thickets of the forest shall be hacked away with iron, and the Lebanon trees shall fall in their majesty. The Lebanon trees, those are the cedars of Lebanon, the tallest trees that people in the Middle East were aware of. Kind of like if we wanted to use an image of something tall, we would say the redwoods of California. That would be the image to use. So just to highlight God's power, here able to fell the tallest trees that we've ever seen. But so there's this destruction that happened, and chapter 11 continues with the result of the destruction. But a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse. Jesse is David's father. A twig shall sprout from his stock. The Spirit of the Lord shall alight upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, a spirit of counsel and valor, a spirit of devotion and reverence for the Lord. He shall sense the truth by his reverence for the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes behold, nor decide by what his ears perceive. Thus he shall judge the poor with equity and decide with justice for the lowly of the land. He shall strike down a land with the rod of his mouth and slay the wicked with the breath of his lips. Like this future king descended from Jesse, from David himself, will be this perfect king who will deal with the poor and deal with evil. Justice shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his waist. And this is the part now that we're most familiar with. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb. Right. So the king himself is going to have these characteristics of power and justice, and the time in which this king will appear will be one in which the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard lie down with the kid, the calf, the beast of prey, and the fatling together with a little boy to herd them. Right? So it'll be a time of peace where natural enemies won't be enemies anymore, and a boy. So Yeled is the word in verse 7. It's unclear what the age bracket of Yeled is. It's certainly somebody who is not an adult yet, and possibly not even an adolescent yet, but we don't know from what age to what age is a Yeled, okay? Because there is in verse 8, it is a babe, and that is someone who nurses. Like a baby is a tinok, based on the word for nursing, which is this, yonek, right? Tinok, yonek are the same words, same root. So that is a baby 0 to 1, 2 years old. Okay, so a babe, a young boy leading all of these animals. Verse 7, the cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion, like the ox, shall eat straw. A babe shall play over a viper's hole, and an infant pass his hand over an adder's den. Right? So there won't be anything to fear. Baby, you don't have to look out for your baby if he's crawling on the ground to make sure that a snake isn't there to bite him. There won't be anything to fear. And lions, who normally hunt their prey will be eating straw just like the ox. Verse 9, in all of my sacred mount, nothing evil or vile shall be done, for the Lord shall be filled with devotion to the Lord as water covers the sea. In that day, the stock of Jesse that has remained standing shall become a standard to peoples. Nations shall seek his counsel, and his abode shall be honored. So be a time of peace, no worry at all. And the descendant of Jesse shall be a council. People from around the world will seek his counsel. And that day, my Lord will apply his hand again to redeeming the other part of his people from Assyria, as also from Egypt, Patros, Nubia, Elam, Shinar, Hamat, and the coastlands. He will hold up a signal to the nations and assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Right? So this is a theme that is in the prayer book, right? When we gather the tzitzit together in the morning service right before the Shema, we say, May arba kanfot haaretz, from the four corners of the earth. We hope that we will be brought back together again. Then Ephraim's envy shall cease, and Judah's harassment shall end. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. Ephraim being the main tribe of the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. So the northern kingdom of Israel is referred to as Ephraim. Judah being the main tribe of the southern kingdom of Israel. So that's the symbol for the southern kingdom. So Ephraim and Judah are at odds throughout the book of Kings, in that time period of kings of Israel. And so here, Ezekiel has this image as well of two branches that Ezekiel is supposed to hold together. One Ephraim is written, the other one is Judah. Put the twigs together and they become one branch. The same idea. Here, Ephraim and Judah won't be enemies anymore, will be coming together. They shall pounce on the back of Philistia to the west, and together plunder the peoples of the east. Edom and Moab shall be subject to them, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. Right? So we'll be united. So this division between Ephraim and Judah, which has caused so many problems and allowed Israel to be defeated by their enemies, that it'll be reversed in this new age. The Lord will dry up the tongue of the Egyptian sea. He will raise his hand over the Euphrates with the might of his wind and break it into 7 wadis so that it can be trodden dry shod. Thus, there shall be a highway for the other part of his people out of Assyria, such as there was for Israel when it left the land of Egypt. Right? So the Euphrates, beyond the Euphrates, if you picture in your mind's eye how the Euphrates ends up in the Persian Gulf, but it starts in the hills of Turkey beyond Syria, that the idea that if the Israelites had been dispersed beyond the Euphrates will dry up to allow Israel to come back as easily as possible. In that day you shall say, I give thanks to you, O Lord, although you are wroth with me. Your wrath has turned back and you comfort me. Behold, the God who gives me triumph. I am confident, unafraid. For Yah, the Lord, is my strength and might, for he has been my deliverance. Joyfully. And this verse, by the way, is the opening verse of Havdalah on Saturday night. Hine el Yeshuati avtach v'lo avchad, ki oziv zimrat yadonai v'hi Yeshua. The next verse also. Ushafte mayim b'sasomi mayanei ha'yeshua. Joyfully shall you draw water from the fountains of triumph. Every Saturday night, we sing Eliyahu Hanavi. We sing these 2 verses and a few other verses as well, because every Saturday night, we're hoping that maybe the Messiah will come this week. And if we're hoping for the Messiah to come this week, well, then we invoke Isaiah's words here, which is all about what it will be like if the Messiah comes. Yes, Jan, unmute yourself.
So is there the connection between the end of the Seder, where we have the Eliyahu Hanavi,
right,
the end of the first Haftarah portion that we talked about today, where it talks about David's descendants,
Right?
and then picking up on this one where we talk specifically about
Absolutely.
one specific descendant,
Right.
and kind of coming to that vision that we talk about when
Yes.
Eliyahu Hanavi comes back to
Absolutely.
kind of towards this descendant.
Connections are always there. It's part and parcel of all the holidays. It's part of almost every Haftarah throughout the year. The rabbis are invoking this image of hope for the future, this time that the Messiah will come. So that at the Seder, at the end of the Seder, we're looking forward to it. At a bris, we have a chair set aside for Elijah. At all times, right? We break a glass at a wedding ceremony to remind us of the destruction of the temple, but hope at the same time that this couple can help bring the broken pieces of glass back together again, and a new life, new joy, right? Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. In those days of the Messiah, you'll hear the jubilant voices singing in Judah, the voice of the bride and the groom. So the wedding is a symbol for the time of the Messiah. So everything, almost everything we do, remembers Egypt, the Exodus from Egypt, and hopes for future redemption. So that's a major theme in our prayers and in what the rabbis are trying to teach when they were teaching in the midst of Roman persecution and oppression, and then the dispersal of the Jewish population of Israel throughout the Roman Empire. So it was a time of great upheaval, a time of great persecution and torture and oppression. And so it was natural for the rabbis to come up with use the images of the prophets themselves, and use the main event in Jewish history, the Exodus from Egypt, as sources of comfort and strength to the people who are living through a time of persecution. So, and it makes sense to use these verses from Isaiah here in Havdalah if we're hoping every Saturday. So Shabbat is supposed to be a taste of the world to come, and Havdalah is a prayer that maybe this week will be the time that the Messiah will come. So the Haftarah concludes verses 4 to the end. And you shall say on that day, praise the Lord, proclaim his name, make his deeds known among his peoples, declare that his name is exalted. Him the Lord, or sing to the Lord, for he has done gloriously. Let this be made known in all the world. Oh, shout for joy, you who dwell in Zion, for great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. So, as the holiday of Passover concludes, hope with hope for the Messianic era, it's interesting that since Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, it has become a tradition to include on Israel Independence Day Hallel in the service, songs of praise, because Israel's Independence Day is seen as a miraculous religious event. How else can one explain the 6 million who were killed by the Nazis in the Holocaust, and then 3 years later to have the state of Israel established and starting to bring back Jews from all corners of the earth to live in Israel, how not to see it as a religious event in that way. So Yom HaAtzmaut includes Hallel in the service. It includes a Torah reading, which is from Deuteronomy chapter 8, which depicts Israel as a land flowing with milk and honey. And the Haftarah is this Haftarah. There is a Haftarah on Yom HaAtzmaut, even though it falls on a weekday, and this is the Haftarah chosen for it. That's what Israel represents. Israel represents the dawn of redemption, at the start of the Messianic era, and this year will be the 73rd Yom HaAtzmaut, and we are still waiting to some degree for this vision of the Messianic era to come true. Okay, so those are the Haftarahs for 7th and 8th day. Any other thoughts or comments about this? Okay, so I want to wish everybody Moadim L'Simcha. Enjoy the rest of the Passover holiday. Hope to see you in services on Shabbat and Sunday. And Chag Sameach, everybody.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Yasher Koach.
Yasher Koach.
Chag Sameach.